My name is First Lieutenant Nora Bennett, 34, U.S. Army Logistics, 42A. In that Nebraska courtroom, they whispered unstable, while fluorescents buzzed. Then the clerk scanned my CAC, the metadata pinged, and the judge froze. Watch the record flip the room. What would you do? Comment your city and subscribe. My name is First Lieutenant Nora Bennett, 34 years old, United States Army, Logistics Officer, 42A branch. I'd stood in courtrooms before, but never like this. Never as the one being judged. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above me felt like an interrogation lamp, spotlighting every crack I tried to hide. This wasn't a court-martial or a disciplinary board. It was civil court, Lancaster County, Nebraska. I was here because my cousin, Evan, had filed a petition to take over my late father's veteran-owned security company, claiming I was mentally unfit to run it. He'd always wanted the company, even when my father was alive. My father had built that business from nothing. Contracts with local hospitals, training unarmed guards, installing access control systems. After Dad passed, I was named successor officer. But now, Evan stood in front of a packed courtroom pretending to care about my well-being, waving a letter that looked official enough to break me. Your Honor, his attorney said, lifting the paper with 2 fingers like it was contaminated truth. We have here a VA evaluation, signed by Dr. Samuel Finch, stating Lieutenant Bennett exhibits chronic instability and unresolved combat trauma. She's clearly unfit to hold a security license, much less oversee armed staff. The words, VA evaluation, hit the crowd like a verdict. I felt their eyes slide toward me. Old neighbors, high school teachers, people who'd once shaken my father's hand on Veterans Day. They weren't seeing a daughter defending a legacy. They were seeing a headline. Veteran's daughter deemed unstable. I didn't flinch. Years in uniform had taught me composure under fire. I kept my shoulders square, chin level. The Army had drilled into me that silence was sometimes stronger than defense. Across the aisle, Evan feigned sympathy. We just want what's best for Nora, he told a reporter in the gallery earlier that morning. She's been through a lot. I'm just trying to protect the family's name. Protect. That was his favorite word. Every time he said it, something of mine went missing. My attorney, Leah Torres, was a fellow veteran, former JAG, now practicing civilian law. She leaned toward me, voice low. Don't react, she murmured. Let him build the lie. We'll pull the floor from under it later. I nodded. I trusted her. In the Army, chain of command teaches you when to move and when to hold. The judge sat at the bench, motionless, eyes scanning the documents. His nameplate read, Judge Ellison. When he looked up to confirm my identity, something subtle flickered in his expression. A pause. Recognition, maybe. But it was gone before I could read it. Lieutenant Bennett, he said, his tone careful, professional. Do you have anything to say at this point? I stood, hands clasped behind my back, a soldier addressing authority. No, Your Honor. My attorney will speak for me. He studied me for a second longer than necessary. Then he nodded, as if weighing something unseen. Behind me, someone whispered, Such a shame. Another voice replied, She was always different. The sound was faint but sharp, like glass cracking under a boot. As Darrow droned on about behavioral inconsistencies and documented evidence, I kept my breathing slow. Every hum of the overhead lights, every scrape of a chair leg against linoleum imprinted into my mind. In combat training, they tell you, when chaos closes in, anchor yourself to one sound. I chose the faint rhythmic buzz above me. It was constant, predictable. When the lawyer finally sat down, the judge ordered a short recess. Evan gave me a practiced look of pity as he passed. Palms out, the gesture of a man trying to help. I didn't meet his eyes. As the courtroom emptied, Leah gathered the printed exhibits. VA evaluation, huh? She muttered, thumbing through the pages. strange. It's dated last year, but Finch retired 5 years ago. And this form code? Her brow furrowed. 1010E. Haven't seen that since 2016. Her words hung between us like a live wire. I said nothing, just stared at the official seal embossed at the bottom of the page. Something about it felt too perfect. Leah slid the document into a folder. We'll verify every line, but for now we stay quiet. Let them underestimate us. I nodded again, gaze fixed on the judge's empty bench. He'd looked at me like a man seeing a ghost. I didn't know why yet, but I would. And when the truth surfaced, it wouldn't need me to shout. It would arrive in procedure, not noise. The next few weeks felt like walking through a town I no longer belonged to. Everywhere I went, I caught whispers dying mid-sentence. Conversations dimmed when I entered a store. And every handshake felt rehearsed, every smile stretched thin. The petition hearing had barely begun, and already the story had spread. Evan's version, of course. She's struggling after deployment, they said. PTSD. Shame, really. The kind of sympathetic gossip that kills reputations faster than hatred ever could. I'd spent 12 years building my career on quiet competence, moving supplies under fire, rerouting convoys when bridges collapsed, keeping my soldiers fed, fueled, and alive. But now, none of that mattered. In the eyes of the town, I wasn't a lieutenant or a leader. I was a rumor. My attorney, Leah, warned me this would happen. They'll isolate you first, she said. It's how bullies operate. Remove your witnesses, then rewrite the story. She was right. Within a week, one of the company's vendors called to pause our cooperation until the case clears. Another politely asked for proof I was medically cleared for administrative responsibility. Evan was choking my operations without ever stepping foot in the office. Money drained faster than resolve. With court costs mounting, I moved out of the townhouse I'd inherited from my father and into a small one-room apartment above a laundromat in Lincoln. No furniture, no pictures. Just a cot, a duffel bag, and the soft rattle of washers spinning below me at night. I took temporary shifts at a local warehouse. 10 hours a day scanning packages under cold fluorescent lights. It wasn't prideful work, but it was honest. And in its rhythm, beep, lift, stack, I found a strange comfort. Repetition is a soldier's oldest friend, but quiet nights have sharp edges. I'd come home, boots still laced, eat dinner from a paper box, and scroll through messages I never answered. Some from old platoon mates, some from officers checking in. I couldn't bear to explain why my name was now tangled in a lawsuit about mental stability. Then one night, the phone rang. The screen read, XO, cap to Pierce. I almost didn't pick up. When I did, his voice was steady, clipped, formal, the voice of chain of command. Bennett, heard there's some noise back home. You good? Just civilian nonsense, sir. Copy that. Your slot's still here when you're ready. Army's got your 6. It wasn't an order. It was a reminder. Belonging doesn't depend on headlines. A few days later, I drove past the VFW Post 139, a squat brick building with faded flags out front. Something pulled me to stop. Inside, the smell hit first. Weak coffee, floor wax, and cigarette ghosts. A few old-timers looked up, eyes curious but kind. Behind the counter, a tall man with silver hair nodded. Evening, Lieutenant. You look like you could use a hot meal. He didn't ask for my story, didn't pry. He just poured coffee and slid over a chipped mug. His name was Ray Henderson, Marine Corps, Vietnam. His wife, Maria, brought out a bowl of beef stew that smelled like patience and pepper. For the first time in weeks, I sat among people who didn't need proof of who I was. They already knew the language. The pauses, the silences, the 1,000-yard stares you don't explain. But outside that small pocket of warmth, Evan's campaign kept tightening. 2 weeks after the recess, he showed up at my door. A paper box of pastries in one hand, documents in the other. Hey, Nora. Thought we could talk like family, he said, stepping past me uninvited. It's getting ugly in court. Why don't you just sign guardianship over? I'll handle the company until you're ready. Ready? I asked. You mean until you own it? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Come on. You're not built for this stress. Sign it and I'll set you up with a monthly stipend. Comfortable life, no pressure. When I didn't move, his tone hardened. If you drag this out, I'll have no choice but to share the full medical file with your CO. You think the Army keeps unstable officers? I stared at him, steady. There is no file. He leaned closer. There will be. He left the pastry box on the counter, sugar-dusted evidence of a threat wrapped in sweetness. When the door shut, I stood in the silence for a long time. My training kicked in. Not the combat kind, but the logistical instinct. When a system fails, trace every component. I opened my notebook, flipped to a clean page, and began writing down every detail I remembered. The letterhead, the date, the form code, even the tiny QR square at the bottom corner. Somewhere in that paperwork was the weak seam. The mistake every liar makes when they try to forge protocol. Tomorrow, I'd start pulling the thread. The second hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning, the kind of cold Nebraska day where your breath fogs against the courthouse glass before you even reach the door. I arrived 10 minutes early, uniform pressed, hair pinned back, posture straight. It wasn't vanity. It was armor. The Army had taught me that even in chaos, presentation is control. Inside, the benches were fuller than before. Local reporters, curious townsfolk, a few faces from the old neighborhood. Word had spread. Lieutenant declared unfit. Family feud over veteran business. People crave scandal more than truth. It gives them something to talk about at lunch. When my name was called, I rose. Evan was already seated beside his attorney, a faint smirk cutting across his face. His confidence was loud, the swagger of a man who believed paperwork was more powerful than principle. Darrow stood, shuffling his stack of exhibits. Your Honor, he began, we'd like to submit additional documentation from the Department of Veterans Affairs, verifying Lieutenant Bennett's ongoing treatment and residual trauma symptoms. He lifted the VA letter again, the same one Leah had flagged as suspicious. The courtroom lights caught its glossy seal. It looked official, almost elegant. But up close I saw it now. The seal was too perfect, the kind of mechanical symmetry no authentic emboss ever carried. The judge took it from him, studying it silently. When his eyes flicked to mine, he froze, just for a heartbeat. A pause so brief most missed it. But I saw it. His pupils dilated. His jaw tightened. Recognition, though I couldn't place why. Then, just as quickly, his face reset. He set the paper down and cleared his throat. Document received, he said flatly. But there was a strain in his tone now, like someone hearing an echo from a battlefield long forgotten. Leah whispered beside me. He knows something. I noticed, I said quietly. The rest of the hearing blurred. Darrow recited phrases like duty of care and best interest of the company. Each one landed like a hammer, forging a false narrative in real time. Then came Evan's testimony. He stepped up with practiced grief. I've loved my cousin since we were kids, he told the judge. But she's not the same after Afghanistan. She zones out. She forgets things. My uncle's company can't survive another unstable leader. Each word hit harder than artillery, but I didn't flinch. My stillness made him falter, just slightly. People expect tears or outrage. Stillness unnerves them. When Leah cross-examined, she kept it clinical. Mr. Walsh, you stated my client forgets things. Have you personally witnessed a memory lapse? Not directly, but... So, hearsay. He stiffened. You're twisting my words. No, Leah replied softly. I'm clarifying them. By the time she sat down, Evan's smirk was gone, but his eyes, cold and narrow, promised retaliation. Court adjourned for lunch. I stepped outside into the brittle air, craving silence. That's when I heard the sharp click of shoes on concrete behind me. "You think you're clever?" I turned. Evan was there, alone, no cameras this time. His face was red, voice low but shaking. "You made me look like a fool in there." "Truth has that effect," I said. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "If you don't drop this, I'll make sure your CO gets that report. The one about your incident overseas. I'll tell them you froze under fire. You'll lose your commission. Then let's see how proud Dad would be." I stared at him, unblinking. "There was no incident. And you just made a threat in public. I'd rethink that." He smiled, a thin, joyless line. "You think anyone here believes you? You're just another broken soldier clinging to your uniform." He turned and walked off, leaving his words like shrapnel in the air. Leah found me minutes later, face tight. "He's escalating. We go on the offensive now." I nodded, steady. "Then we start where all bad lies break. In procedure." That night, under the dim light of my apartment, I spread the forged letter across the table. My notebook lay open beside it, every observation from the last week. The form code, the QR, the signature, the seal. Each piece was a breadcrumb. I snapped photos, cross-referenced them against official VA form indexes I found online. And there it was. The first crack. That form code had been discontinued 5 years ago. Leah's earlier suspicion was right. By midnight, we had a plan. 1. File a subpoena for the native PDF metadata. 2. Send a VA OIG inquiry for document authenticity. 3. Pull state licensing logs to show I'd passed every background check since return. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about chain of custody. Let Evan tell his story in gossip and pity. I'd tell mine in records, signatures, and timestamps. When you serve long enough, you learn one rule that never fails. Paper beats noise. Anyone can talk. But a log, a form, a timestamp, those don't flinch. By Monday, Leah had already filed 3 requests, one to the VA Office of Inspector General, another to the State Licensing Bureau, and one more, a metadata subpoena demanding the original version of the so-called psych report. Evan's lawyer submitted. I spent that morning at my father's old company building, the lights still dimmed, desks covered in a fine layer of dust. The office smelled like solder and old paperwork, his scent still clinging to every drawer. I hadn't been back since the petition was filed, but something told me the answers weren't only in government databases. Dad was meticulous, almost obsessively so. Every invoice, every inspection, every training cert, neatly logged, signed, dated. "A good officer," he used to say, "is measured by her paperwork when she isn't in the room." I unlocked his filing cabinet and began combing through the archives. Midway down, beneath the 2019 folder, I found a black 3-ring binder marked in faded ink. Successor documentation. Inside were board minutes, notary seals, even his handwritten note naming me corporate officer. But tucked between them was something else. An audit trail. A clean sheet showing each inspection, renewal, and federal compliance check. Every single one signed off and current. In other words, no instability, no red flags. I made copies and scanned them. Leah wanted every document in triplicate. One for the file, one for the fight, one for the fire, she joked. By mid-afternoon, her phone buzzed. It was Investigator Marcus Thorne from the VA OIG. "Ms. Torres, this is Thorne, Office of Inspector General. I've reviewed the attachment you sent over, the psych evaluation under Form Code 1010E. You were right to flag it." Leah put the call on speaker. "What did you find?" she asked. "Well, for starters, Form 1010E hasn't existed in active use since 2016. It was replaced by 1010EZA. Whoever drafted this used an obsolete template, and they copied the header from a publicly available PDF. The signature block is a cut-paste composite. And the watermark? It's from a private print vendor, not VA press stock. Leah exhaled slowly. So, counterfeit? Correct. And the attending physician listed Dr. Samuel Finch, retired in 2018. He's confirmed he's never evaluated a patient named Nora Bennett. My pulse didn't quicken. It steadied. A calm so clear it almost frightened me. Can you testify to that? Leah asked. Absolutely. I'll forward our preliminary verification memo tonight. After the call, Leah leaned back, arms crossed. We've got our breach. Form code, signature seal, all falsified. Now we tie it to intent. Intent. In Army terms, that's the commander's purpose. In court, it's motive. The next step was proving Evan's team knew the document was fake. That meant access. Who had the file first? Who emailed it? Who printed it? I pulled out my notebook again, flipping to where I'd drawn a rough map of Darrow's folder from the first hearing. I remembered the tab, handwritten 1010E, and the email label at the top of his file. The sender's address. It wasn't VA Gov. It was a generic webmail domain. That was enough for Leah. We'll subpoena the transmission log. If that file originated outside government servers, the chain of custody is shot. He's dead in the water. As she prepared the motion, I drove to the county emergency management office, the same building I'd worked with 2 years earlier during a tornado response drill. My DSCA training had kicked in that day, and our convoy had evacuated a school bus caught in a collapsing bridge zone. The records would still exist: CAD logs, radio traffic, dispatch timestamps. The clerk, an older woman with a nameplate that read Ms. Jensen, looked up from her keyboard. You were the lieutenant who helped coordinate that evacuation, weren't you? I nodded. Just need a copy of that day's dispatch log, for certification reference. She smiled faintly. I remember your voice over the radio. Calmest person on that line. 10 minutes later, I walked out with printed call for service logs, each stamped and certified. My name, my rank, my timestamp. That evening, I spread everything across my table. The fake psych form, the audit ledger, the dispatch logs, the corporate minutes. A mosaic of truth and lies. Somewhere in that paperwork, buried in the ink, was the reason the judge had paused when he saw me. I didn't know it yet, but soon I would. Because as Leah said before leaving my apartment that night, her voice calm but resolute. Tomorrow we stop reacting. Tomorrow, the record speaks. The next morning, the courthouse was different. Not in how it looked. Same marble floor, same brass plaque with the county seal, but in how it felt. This time, I wasn't walking in alone. Leah strode beside me, her binder tucked under one arm like a field manual. Behind her was Investigator Thorne, tall and calm, wearing his VA badge clipped to his belt. His presence changed the air. Courtrooms feed on perception, authority, rank, bearing. And that morning, I carried all three. When we stepped in, Evan and his lawyer Darrow were already seated, whispering in low tones. Darrow glanced up, saw the badge on Thorne's hip, and his expression faltered. A faint twitch in the jaw, the kind only a guilty man gets when he sees a uniform he can't manipulate. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge, the same one who'd studied me so intently days before, entered and adjusted his glasses. Counsel, he began. We are reconvened on Walsh versus Bennett. You may proceed. Darrow rose first, confident again, or pretending to be. Your Honor, before the defense's theatrics continue, I'd like to remind the court that my client seeks only stability. Lieutenant Bennett's record shows clear emotional distress. Objection. Leah cut in, her tone precise and steady. Your Honor, before this narrative goes further, we need to address the evidence presented last week. The judge leaned forward. Proceed. Leah lifted one document, the counterfeit VA evaluation, between two fingers, like evidence in a crime scene photo. This report, she said, was entered as Exhibit C by the plaintiff. It claims to be a certified psychological assessment from a Veterans Affairs physician. We now have verified federal testimony proving it's a forgery." A whisper rippled through the room. Darrow stiffened. Leah continued, "With the court's permission, I'd like to call Investigator Marcus Thorne, Office of Inspector General, Department of Veterans Affairs." When Thorne took the stand, the quiet was absolute. His badge caught the light. "Mr. Thorne," Leah began, "did your office authenticate the document presented as Exhibit C?" "We did." "And what did you find?" "It's counterfeit. The form number used was retired in 2016. The seal is from a commercial template. The listed physician has been retired since 2018. And the file's metadata traces back to a private email address, not a VA network." The judge's pen stopped mid-motion. "You're certain?" "Beyond any doubt." Leah turned toward the bench. "Your Honor, the law is clear. Presenting a falsified federal document as evidence constitutes a criminal act under Title 18, Section 1001. We're moving to strike Exhibit C and refer this matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for review." The courtroom held its breath. Darrow's knuckles whitened around his papers. Evan leaned forward, whispering something urgent, but his lawyer didn't move. The judge finally exhaled. "Motion granted. Exhibit C is stricken from the record. Investigator Thorne, I'll expect your full report by week's end." He turned his gaze to Darrow. "Counsel, you may want to confer with your client." Darrow's voice cracked slightly. "Your Honor, my client wasn't aware." Leah's tone cut cleanly through. "Ignorance doesn't erase intent. Someone forged this to discredit a decorated service member and strip her of legal standing. That's not a misunderstanding. That's malice." The judge's gavel struck once. "Enough. We'll recess 10 minutes. As the bailiff cleared the aisle, Evan turned toward me. His mask had cracked, the arrogance gone, replaced by a flicker of something close to fear. "You think this proves anything?" he hissed. "You still lost everything the moment you wore that uniform." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Because across the room, the American flag stood just behind the judge's bench, perfectly still. For me, that flag wasn't decoration. It was oath and evidence. And it had just spoken louder than his lies ever could. When the judge returned, his tone carried a weight the room hadn't heard before. "This court recognizes Lieutenant Bennett's service and the credibility of her record. The petition for conservatorship is hereby dismissed with prejudice. Further, the clerk will transmit all evidence related to Exhibit C to the Department of Justice for review." Leah's hand touched my shoulder briefly. Not victory, but acknowledgement. Outside, reporters had gathered, drawn by the federal presence. Flashbulbs popped. One shouted, "Lieutenant, what's your comment?" I paused at the steps, looked straight into the camera lens, and said quietly, "Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's just waiting for the truth to catch up." Then I turned and walked down the steps. Steady, unshaken, and free. In the weeks that followed, the courthouse became a memory. The kind that sits quiet in the background until a stray sound or smell brings it rushing back. The metallic echo of the judge's gavel, the weight of a uniform I almost lost, the sharp fluorescent light bouncing off Evan's pale face when he realized the game was over. They all lingered. But for the first time in months, my mornings began without dread. No more legal summons. No more forged paperwork waiting in my mailbox. I could breathe again. Not the shallow survival breaths of someone under siege, but the kind you take when you finally step off a battlefield and realize the shooting has stopped. I didn't return to the base immediately. My CO, Captain Ruiz, had given me extended leave. "Take time," he said. "You fought 2 wars, one overseas and one in your own family. Don't rush back until you know what you want to fight for next." So, I stayed in the quiet. Every day I drove out past the city limits, to the fields that rolled on for miles, where you could almost hear the earth breathe. It reminded me of the training ranges, open, still, deceptively peaceful. There was something healing in that emptiness. I'd bring a thermos of coffee, park near a fence line, and just sit there as the dawn burned off the mist. No phone, no noise, just silence. The kind you don't get in a courtroom or a barracks. One morning, I pulled out my old rucksack, the one with the faded unit patch stitched to the side. Inside, I found a folded piece of paper, yellowed around the edges. My commissioning oath. The same words I'd spoken years ago, standing on a parade ground, right hand raised, heart pounding with pride. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. When I'd first spoken that line, I'd thought of battlefields, insurgents, the sound of distant fire. I never imagined one day domestic would mean someone with my last name, sitting across from me in a courtroom. That realization didn't make me bitter. It made me aware that the fight for integrity doesn't always wear a uniform or carry a rifle. Sometimes it shows up in a family estate hearing, or a forged piece of paper, or a whisper campaign meant to make you question your worth. And sometimes holding the line means walking away. Not because you lost, but because you're finally strong enough not to keep proving yourself to people who'll never see you clearly. A few weeks later, I stopped by the local Veterans Outreach Center. It was a small building behind the library, the kind most people passed without noticing. Inside were a few folding tables, a coffee pot that never stopped brewing, and the smell of old paper and burnt toast. The coordinator, a retired Air Force sergeant named Lyle, recognized me from the news. "You're the officer from the Bennett case," he said softly. "Heard you held your ground. That took guts." I shrugged. It wasn't about winning. It was about telling the truth and letting it stand on its own. He nodded slowly. That's the hardest part for most folks. After the fight's over, figuring out what to do with the quiet. He was right. Quiet can be its own kind of battlefield. So I started volunteering, helping other vets navigate claims, paperwork, and the maze of acronyms that came with post-service life. It was small work, but it was honest, and it kept my hands busy while my soul caught up. Sometimes a young private would sit across from me, eyes tired, voice shaking as they talked about getting denied benefits or being dismissed as unstable. I'd listen, and when they finished, I'd tell them the same thing I'd learned the hard way. Don't mistake silence for surrender. Just because you're not shouting doesn't mean you're not fighting. Over time, those hours helping others began to fill the gaps that Evan's betrayal had carved out. My life became quieter, steadier, built on purpose, not pain. And one evening, as I locked up the outreach office and stepped outside, I saw the sunset stretch across the sky. Crimson, gold, fading into blue. It reminded me of campaign ribbons, of things earned the hard way. In that light, I finally understood something my father, a soldier before me, once said, "Some victories don't make noise. They just leave you standing when everything else has fallen." I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I'd survived with honor intact. Tomorrow I'd go back to my unit. But tonight I stood still under the fading sky, a soldier at ease, finally off duty. Looking back now, the courtroom feels like another lifetime. A theater where truth fought for space amid whispers and paper trails. I used to think war was something that happened on foreign soil, with smoke and noise and orders barked over comms. But standing there in that silent Nebraska courthouse, staring down my own brother across a polished oak table, I learned a harder truth. Not all battles echo. Some unfold in quiet rooms, beneath fluorescent lights, and the only weapon you have is your composure. Evan once told me I was too rigid, too by the book, that I didn't understand how the real world works. Maybe he was right. I didn't understand how deceit could wear a smile or how betrayal could sound polite. But what I did understand, what the Army had drilled into my bones, was discipline. And in the end, that discipline was what saved me. When everyone else shouted, I held the line. When the lies piled up, I trusted procedure. When they tried to strip me of honor, I remembered that honor isn't something anyone can take. It's something you can only surrender. And I didn't. The truth is, I didn't walk out of that courthouse triumphant. I walked out scarred, wiser, and a little quieter. Because justice, when it finally comes, doesn't roar. It settles, like dust after a long firefight. Since that day, I've met other veterans, men and women who fought battles no one clapped for. Some against bureaucracy, some against stigma, some against silence itself. I see the same look in their eyes that I once saw in the mirror. That blend of fatigue and fire, of someone who's been underestimated and still refuses to break. Every soldier learns early. You don't always pick your battlefield, but you do pick how you stand on it. In court, I didn't have rank or command or a platoon at my back. All I had was truth, and the calm certainty that even if no one believed me, I'd tell it anyway. That's something you can't teach in basic training. That's something life drills into you the hard way. If there's one thing I took from all this, it's that respect should never be treated like a prize handed out after humiliation. It should be the starting point, the default. Because every person you meet, no matter how quiet, carries a story you haven't heard and a strength you haven't seen. Evan's downfall wasn't born in a single forged document. It started the moment he decided appearance mattered more than integrity. I've seen the same mistake in leaders, officers who shout to be obeyed instead of earning it. But rank fades fast when truth walks in. To the ones listening, maybe you've been talked over, dismissed, called weak, or told you're not enough. Maybe someone tried to define you by your worst moment. Remember this: quiet doesn't mean broken. It means controlled. It means strategic. It means you know exactly when to speak and when to let silence make your point. I didn't win because I shouted louder. I won because I refused to bow. And if you've ever stood in that same silence, holding the line when no one else did, then you already understand what I learned in that courtroom. Dignity doesn't expire. Authority doesn't come from noise. Strength isn't loud. It's steady. What about you? Have you ever seen someone underestimated until the truth finally came out? Drop your thoughts below. I read every one. And if this story spoke to you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that composure is its own kind of power. We post new stories every day. Real stories of respect, protocol, and hidden strength. Because in a world that forgets what dignity looks like, it's up to us to remember.